Hi friends, continuing to the chapter, the namesake. And so Gogol formal educational begins. At the top of a sheet of an scratchy, pale yellow paper, he writes out his pet name again and again, and the alphabet in the capital and the lower cases. He learns to add and subtract and to spell his first words. In the front cover of the textbook from which he is taught to read, and he leaves his leggy, writing his name in 100 numbers, two pencils below a series of the others. In the art class, his favorite hour of the week, he carves his name with a paper clip into the bottoms of a clay cup and the bowls. He pastes an uncooked pasta to the cupboard and leaves his signatures in fat brush strokes the below paintings. Day after the day, he brings his creation home to Ashima, who hangs them proudly on the refrigerator doors. Gogol G. He signs his work in the lower right hand corner as if they were needed to be distinguished him from any other Gogol in the school. It may his sister is born. This time the labor happens quickly. They are thinking about going to an yard sale in the neighborhood one Saturday morning, playing Bengali songs on the stereo. Gogol is eating a frozen waffle for the breakfast, wishing his parents would turn off the music so that he could hear the cartoons he is watching. When his mother's water breaks, his father switches off the music and call Dilip and Maya Nandi, who lives in a suburbs 20 minutes away and have a little boy of their own. Then he calls the next door neighbor, Mrs. Merton, who has offered to look after the Gogol until the Nandis arrive. Though his parents have prepared him for the event, when Mrs. Merton shows up with her needlepoint, he feels standard, no longer in the mood for the cartoon. He stands on the front step watching his father help his mother into the car, waving as they pull away. To pass the time, he draws a picture of himself and his parents and his new sibling, standing in a row in front of their house. He remembers to put a dot on the mother's forehead, glasses on his father's face, a lamppost by the flagstone path in the front of the house. Well, if that not the spitting image, Mrs. Merton says, looking over his shoulders. That evening, Maya Nandi, whom he calls Maya Masi, as if she were his own mother's sister, his own aunt, is heating up the dinner she have brought over, when his father calls to say that baby has arrived. The next day, Gogol sees his mother sitting in an aged and angled bed, a plastic bracelet over her wrist, his stomach no longer as hard as round. Through a big glass window, he sees his sisters asleep, lying in a small glass bed, the only one of the babies in the nursery to have a thick head of a black hair. He is introduced to his mother's nurse. He drinks the juice and eats the puddings of his mother's tray. Slyly, he gives his mother the pictures he has drawn. Underneath the figures, he written his own name, and Ma and Baba. The only space under the baby is blank. I didn't know the baby's name, Gogol says, which is when his parents tell him. This time, Ashok and Ashmita are ready. They have a name lined up for a boy or a girl. They have learned this lesson after Gogol. They have learned that the school in America will ignore parents' instructions and register a child under his best names. The only way to avoid such confusions, they have concluded, is to do away with the pet names altogether, as many of their Bengali friends have already done. For their daughter, good name and a pet name are one and the same. Sonali meaning she who is golden. 2 days later, coming back from the school, Gogol finds his mother at home again, wearing a bathrobe instead of a sari, and sees his sister awake for the first time. She is dressed in the pink pyjamas that console her hands and the feet, with the pink band tied around her moon-shaped face. His father is home too. His parents sits Gogols on the living room sofa and place Sonali in his lap, telling him to hold her against his chest. A hand coupled under her head, and his father takes a picture with a new Nikon 35mm camera. The shutter advances softly, repeatedly. The room is bathed in the rich afternoon light. "Hi, Sonali," Ganguly says, sitting stiffly, looking down at her face, until then up at the lens. Though Sonali is the name of her birth certificate, the name she will carry officially through the life. At home, they will begin to call her Sonu, then Sona, and finally Sonia. Sonia make her citizens of the world. It is a Russian link to her brother, it's European, South American. Eventually, it will be a name of an Indian Prime Minister, Italian wife, and the first Gogol is disappointed by the fact that he plays with her, that all she does is sleep and soil her diapers and cry. But eventually, she does his sleeping and soil her diapers, and she begins to respond to him, cackling when he tickles her stomach or pushes her in a swing operated by a noisy crank, or when he cries out peekaboo. He helps his mother to bath her, fetching the towel and the shampoo. He enters her in the back seat of the car when they drive on to the highways on Saturday evening, on the way to the dinner parties thrown by their parents' friend. For by now, all the Cambridge Bengalis have moved to the place like Dinham and Frankman and Lexington and Winchesters, to the house with the backyards and the driveways. They have met so many Bengali that there is rarely a Saturdays free, so that for the rest of his life, Ganguly's childhood memories of Saturday evening will consist of a single repeated scenes. The 30 odd peoples in a 3-bedroom suburban houses, the children's watching television or playing a board games in an basement. The parents eating and the conversation in the Bengali, the children's don't speak among themselves. He will remember eating, watering down the curry of a paper plates, sometimes pizza or Chinese ordered specially for the kids. There are so many guests invited to Sonia's rice ceremony that Ashok's arranged to rent a building on campus with 20 folding tables and an industrial stove. Unlike her compliant older brother, Sonia, 7 months old, refuses all the food. She plays with the dirt they have dug up from the yard and threatens to put the dollar bills into her mouth. This one of the guests remarks, "This one is a true American." As they lives in the New England, swell with the fellow Bengali friends, the members of that other former life, those who knows Ashima and Ashoke not by their good names, but as Monu and Mithu, slowly dwindling. More deaths come, more telephone calls startle them in the middle of the night. More letters arrive in the mailboxing informing them of an aunt and uncles no longer with them. The news of these deaths never get lost in the mail as other letters do. Somehow the bad news, however ridden with a statistic, however filled with echoes, always manage to be conceived. Within a decade about, they are both orphaned. Ashok's parents, both dead from the cancer, Ashima's mother from the kidney diseases, Gogol and Sonia are woken by these deaths in the early mornings, the parents screaming on the other side of their bedroom walls. They stumbled into their parents' room, uncomprehending, embarrassed at the sight of their parents' tears, feeling only slightly sad. In some senses, Ashok and Ashima lives the lives of an extremely aged. Those for whom everyone they once knew and loved is lost. Those who survive and are consoled by the memory alone. Even those family members who continue to live seems death somehow. Always invisible, impossible to touch, voice on the phone, occasionally bearing news of birth and weddings, sent chills down their spines. How could it be still alive, still talking? The sight of them when they visit Calcutta every few years feels stranger still. 6 or 8 weeks passing like a dream. Once back on Pemberton Road in the modest house that it is suddenly a mammoth. There is nothing to remind them, in spite of the hundreds or so relatives they have just seen. They feel as if they are the only Gangulis in the world. The people they have grown up with will never see this life. Of this they are certain. They will never breathe the air of damp New England mornings. See smoke rising from a neighbor's chimney. Shivers in the car waiting for the glass to defrost and the engine to warm. And it to the casual observer. Gangulis, apart from the name of their mailbox, apart from the issues of India Abroad and Sangbat Bichra that are delivered there, appears no different from their neighbors. Their garage, like every other, contains shovel and pruning shells and the sled. They purchase a barbecue for a tandoori on the porch in the summer. Each step, each aquatism, no matter how small, involves deliberation, consolations with the Bengali friends. Was there a difference between a plastic rake and a metal one? Which was perfectible, a live Christmas tree or an artificial one? They learned to roast the turkey, albeit wrapped within garlic and pumpkin and cananes at Thanksgiving, to nail a wreath to their doors in December, to wrap the woolen scarves around the snowman, to the color boiled eggs, violet and the pink at the Easter, and hide them around the houses. For the sake of an Gogol and Sonia, they celebrate with prospectively increasing the fanfare the birth of the Christ, and even the children look forward to far more than the worships of Durga and Saraswati. During pujas scheduled for the convenience on 2 Saturdays a year, Gogol and Sonia are dragged off to the high school or a night of an column hall overtaken by the Bengalis, where they are required to throw an marigold petal at a cardboard effigy of an goddess and eat the bland vegetarian food. It can't compare to the Christians when they hang stocking on the fireplace mantle and set out the cookies and milk for Santa Claus and receive a heaps of the present and stay home from the school. There are the other ways in which Ashok and Ashima gives in. Though Ashima continues to wear nothing but saris and sandals for Bata, Ashok, accustomed to wearing a tailor-made pants and shirt all his life, learns to buy a ready-made. He trades in the fountain pen for ball pen. Willingson's blade and his broad bristle shaving brush for big razors, bought 6 to a pack. Though he is now a tenured full professor, he stops wearing the jacket and tries to the university. Gives that there is a clock everywhere he runs at the side of his bed. Over the stove where he prepares the tea. In the car he drives to the work on the wall opposite of his desk. He stops wearing a wristwatch, resigning his fave luba to the depth of his socks drawer. In the supermarket net, they let Gogol fill the cart with the items that he and Sonia, but not they, consume. Individually, the wrapped slice of a cheese, mayonnaise, tuna fish, hot dogs. For Gogol lashes, they stand at Delhi to buy a cold cuts. And in the morning, Ashima makes a sandwich with an bolonga or the roast beef. At his instance, she consented and made him an American dinner once a week as a treat. Shake and bake chicken or Hamsburg helper prepared with a ground lamb. Still, they don't want what they can. They make a point of driving into an Cambridge with the children when the Anu trilogy plays at the Orson Wells, or where there is a Hatkali dancer performed on an sitar rectial at an memorial hall. When Gogol is in the 3rd grade, they send him to Bengali language and the culture lesson every other Saturday, held in the house of one of their friends. From when Ashima and Ashoke close their eyes, it never fails to unsettle them. That their children sounds just like Americans, expertly conversing in a language that still at the time confirms them. In accents, they are astonished not to trust. In Bengali class, Gogol is taught to read and write in his ancestral alphabet, which begins at the back of his throat with an unaspirated K and marches steadily across the roof of his mouth, ending with an exclusive vowels that hovers outside his lips. He is taught to write the letters that hang from a bar and eventually to collapse those integrate shapes into his name. They read and hand out writings in English about the Bengali resonance and the revolution explodes of Subhash Chandra Bose. The children in the class study without interest, wishing they could be a ballet or a softball artist instead. Gogol hates it because it keeps him from attending every other sessions of a Saturday morning drawing a class he enrolled in. At the suggestion of his art teacher, the drawing class is held on the top floor of the public library. On nice days, they are taken from the walks through his historic districts, carrying a large sketch pad and the pencil and told to draw the facade of this building or that. In Bengali class, they read from the hand seen primes brought back by their teachers from Calcutta, intent for 5 years old printed. Gogol can't help noticing on the paper that resembled the folded toilet paper he used at the school. As a boy, Gogol doesn't mind his name. He recognized a piece of himself in the road, go left, go right, go slow. For the birthdays, his mother ordered a cake on which his name was piped across the white frosted surface in a bright blue surgery script. It's all seen perfectly normal. It doesn't bother him that his name is never an option on the keychain or the metal pins or the refrigerator magnets. He has been told that he was named after a famous Russian author born in a previous century, that the author name therefore is known throughout the world and will live on forever. One day his father take him to the university library and show him, on a shelf well beyond his reach, a row of an Gogol spines. When his father opened up one of the book to a random page, the print is far smaller than the Hardy Boys series Gogol has become recently to enjoy. In a few minutes, he tells his fathers that you will be ready to read them, though the subtitles teachers at the school always pause, looking apologetics when they arrive at his name on the roster, forcing Gogol to call out before even being summoned. That's me. Teachers in the school systems knows not to give it to the second thought. After a year or two, the students no longer tease us and says giggle or garly. In the program of the school Christmas play, the parents are astonished to seeing his name among the cast. Gogol is an outstanding student, curious and cooperative. His teachers write a year after a year on the report cards, "Go Gogol." His classmates shout on golden autumn days as he runs the bases or sprint in a dash. As for his last name, Ganguly, by the time he is 10, he had been to Calcutta 3 more times, twice in the summer and once during the Durga Puja, and from the most recent trip, he still remembers the sight of its etched respectability into the whitewashed exterior of his parental grandparent house. He remembered the astonishment of seeing a 6 pages full of Gangulis, 3 columns to a page, in the Calcutta telephone directory. He would wanted to rip out the page as an souvenir. But when he didn't told this to one of his cousins, the cousin had laughed. On taxi rides through the city, going to visit the various house of his relative, his father has pointed out the name elsewhere. On the awakening of the confrigators and the stationery and the opticians, he had told Gogol that Ganguly is legally of the British and agonized the way of pronouncing his real surname, Gango Bathari. Back home on an Pemtoran road, he helped his father paste individual the golden letter bought from a rack in the hardware store, spelling out Ganguly on one side of the mailbox. One morning, the day of after the Halloween, Gogol discovered on his way to the bus stop that it has been shortened to gang, with the word green scrawled in the pencil following it. His ears burn at the sight, and he runs back into the house, sickened, certain of an insult his father will feel. Though it is his last name too, sometimes tells Gogol that the discrepancy is intended for his parents more than Sonia and him. For by now he is aware in the stores of a cashier smiling at his parents' accent, and of the salesman who preferred to direct their conversation to Gogol as though his parents were either incompetent or deaf. But his father is unaffected at such moments, just as he is unaffected by the mailbox. It is only the boys having fun, he tells Gogol, flicking the matches away with the back of a hand, and that evening they drive back to the hardware stores to buy the missing letters again. Then one day the peculiarity of his name became apparent. He is 11 years old, in the 6th grade. On a school field trip of some historical intent, they set off in their school bus, 2 classes, 2 teachers, 2 cheaper cons along for a ride, driving straight through the town on to the highways. It is chilly, spectacular November day. The blue sky cloudless, the trees shedding bright yellow leaves that blanket the ground. The children screams and sings and drink cans of a soda wrapped in an aluminium foil. First, they visit a textile mill somewhere in the Rhode Island. The next stop, is a small, unpainted wooden house with a tiny windows sitting on a large plot of land. Inside, after adjusting to the diminished light, they stare at the desk with the inkwell and its top, a soot-stained fireplace, a washtub, and a short, narrow bed. It was once the home of a poet, they are told. All the furniture is roped off from the center of the room, with the little signs telling them not to touch. The ceiling is so low that the teachers duck their heads as they walk from the darkened room to the room. They look at the kitchen when it is iron stove and a stone sink and a file along a dirt path to look at the outhouse. The students shriek with the disgust at the sight of an tin pan hanging from the bottom of an wooden chair. In the gift shop, Gogol buys a postcard of the house and the ballpoint pen, discussing as a quill. In the final stop on the field trip, a short distance by the bus from the poet house, is an graveyard where the writer's lies buried. They take a few minutes wandering from stone to stone among thin and thick tables, some leaning back as if pressed by a wind. The stones are square and arched, black and grey, more often plain than shiny, caked with lichens and the moss. On many of the stones, the inspiration have folded. They find the stone that bears the poet name. Line up, the teacher says. It's time for a project. The students are each given several sheets of a newspapers, prints, and the thick colored crayons whose label has been peeled. Gogol can't help but feel a chill. He has never set foot in a graveyard before, only glimpsed them in passing, riding in the cars. There is a large one of an outskirt of their town. Once stuck in the traffic, he and his family had witnessed a burial from a distance, and ever since then, whenever they drive by his mother, always tell them to await their eyes. To Gogol's surprise, they are told not to draw the gravestones but to rub their surface. A teacher crouches down, one hand holding the newsprint in the place, and shows them how. The children begins to scamper between the rows of the dead over the leathery leaves looking for their own names. A handful turbaned when they are able to claim a grave they are related to. Smith, they holler, Collins, Ode. Gogol is old enough to know that there is no Bengali here. He is old enough to know that he himself will be burned, not buried, that his body will occupy no plot of earth, that no stone in the country will bear his name beyond the life. In Calcutta, from the taxis and one from the roof of his grandparents' house, he has seen the dead bodies of the strangers carried on the people's shoulders through the streets, decked with the flowers wrapped with the sheets. He walked over to a slim, blackened stone with an pleasing shape, rounded at the top before rising into the cross. He kneels on the grass and holds up the newsprints. The sun is already sinking and his fingers are stiff with the cold. The teachers and the cheaper ones sit on the ground, legs extended, leaning back against the headstones, the aroma of their menthol cigarettes drifting through the air. At first, nothing appears apart from the grainy, featherless wash of an midnight blues. But then suddenly, the crayon meets with a slight resistance, and letters, one after the another, emerge magically on the page. Abhijan Kavan, 701 to 45. Gogol had never met a person named Abhijat, just as he now realizes he has never met another Gogol. He wonders how to pronounce Abhijat, whether it is a man or a woman's name. He walks to the another tomb base, less than a football tall, and presses another sheet of a paper in its surface. This one says that Angush Mantar, a child. He slutters Imagine the bones no longer than this below the ground. Some of the other children in the class, already bored with the project, begin chasing one another around the store, pushing and teasing and snapping guns. But Gogol dashed from the grave to the grave with papers and the crayons in the hand, bringing to the life one name after the another. Pergain Wooden, dead in 1699. Ezel and Uriath Lockwood, brothers, rest in peace. He likes these names like the oldest, their flamboyance. Now, those are some names you don't see very often those days. One of the chapper ones passing by and looking down at his rubbing remarks, sort of like yours. Until now, it has not occurred to Gogol the name dies over time, that they perish just as people do. On the ride back to the school, the rubbing made by the other children are torn up, crumbled, tossed at one another's head, abandoned below the dark green seats. But Gogol is silent, his rubbing rolled up carefully like the parchment in his lap. At the home, his mother is horrified. What type of the field trip was this? It was enough that they have applied the lipstick to their corpse and buried them in the silk-lined boxes. Only in America, a phrase she has begun to resort of there often these days. Only in America are the children taken to the cemeteries in the name of the art. What next? She demands to know. A trip to the morgue. In Calcutta, the burning gash or the most forbidden of the place, she tells Gogol, and though she tries her best not to, though she was here, not there, both time it happened. She sees her parents' bodies swallowed by the flames. Death is not an pastime, she says, her voice rising unsteadily. Not a place to making a painting. She refuses to display the rubbings in the kitchen alongside his other creations, his charcoal drawings and his magazine collages, his pencil sketches of a Greek temple copied from an encyclopedia, his pastel image of the public library facade awarded the first place in a contest sponsored by the library trustees. Never before has she rejected a piece of her son's art. The guilt she feels at the Gogol deflated expression is left by the common sense. How can she be expected to cook a dinner for her family with the names of dead people on the wall? But Gogol is attached to them for the reasons he cannot explain or necessarily understand. These ancient Persian spirit, these were very first immigrant to the America. These baberies of unthinkable, absolute names have spoken to him, so much so that in spite of his mother's disgust, he refuses to throw the rumblings away. He rolls them up, takes them upstairs and puts them in his room behind the chest of his drawer, where he knows his mother will never bother to look, and where they will remain ignored but protected, gather dust for the years to come. In 1982, Gogol's 14th birthday, like most events in his life, it is another excuse for his parents to throw a party for the Bengali friends. His own friends from the school were invited the previous day, a tame affair with a pizza, and that his father picked up on his way from the home to the work. A baseball game watched together on television, some ping pong in the den. For the first time in his life, he said no to the frosted cake, the box of an aquarium ice cream, the hot dogs in the buns, the balloon, and the streamers taped to the walls. The other celebration, the Bengali one, is held on the closest Saturday to the actual date of his birthday. As usual, his mother cooked for the days beforehand, cramming the refrigerator with the stock of an foil craft trays. She makes sure to prepare his father's favorite things, lamb curry with a lot of potatoes lunches, thick chana dals with swollen brown raisins, pineapple chutney, sandwiches molded out of an saffron tinted Rictova cheese. All this is less stressful to her than the task of feeding a handful of American children, half of whom always claims they are allergic to the milk. All of them refuse to eat the crust of their berets. Close to the 40 guests come from 3 different states. Women are dressed in the saris, far more dazzling than the pants and the polo shirts their husbands wear. A group of men sitting in a circle on the floor and immediately start a game of poker. These are his Mazis and Mishos, his honorary aunts and uncles. They all bring their children, his parents. Crowd does not believe in babysitters. As usual, Gogol is the oldest child in the group. He is too old to be playing hide and seek with the 8-year-old Sonia and her ponytail, gap-toothed friend, but not old enough to sit in the living room and discuss Regomonic with his father and the rest of her husbands, or to sit around the dining room table gossiping with his mother and the wives. The closest person to him in the age is a girl named Maushimi, whose family recently moved to Massachusetts from England and whose 13th birthday was celebrated in similar fashion a few months ago. But Gogol and Mosumi had nothing to say to each other. Mosumi sits cross-legged on the floor in a grass with an maroon plastic frames and puffy fulka-dotted headband holding back their thick, thin-chained hair. In her lap is a Kelly green Bermuda bag with a pink piping and a wooden handles. Inside the bag is a tube of an 7-Up flavored lip balm that she draws from time to time across her mouth. She is reading a well-thumbed paper back a copy of an Pride and Prejudice, while the other children, Gogol included, watching the Love Boat and the Fantasy Island, piled together on the top and around the side of his parents' bed. Occasionally, one of the children asks Mozimi to say something, anything in her English accent. Sonia asks if she has ever seen a Princess Diana on the street. I desert American television. Mozini eventually declares to everyone's delight, then wanders into the hallway to continue her readings. Presents are opened when the guests are gone. Gogol civics several dictionaries, several calculators, several cross pen and pencil sets, several ugly sweaters. His parents give him an Instamic camera, a new sketchbook, colored pencil, and the mechanical pen he had asked for, and a $20 to spend as he wishes. Sonia had made him a card with a magic maker on paper. She would write out of one of his own sketchbooks which says Happy Birthday Gogols, the name she insists on calling him instead of Dada. His mother sets aside things that he doesn't like, which is the most everything, to give his cousin the next time they go to India. Later that night, he is alone in his room, listening to the side 3 of the White Album on his parent cassette of RCA turntable. The album is a present from his American birthday party given to him by one of his friends at the school. Born when the band was near the death, Gogol is an passionate devotee of John Paul, George and Ringo. In the recent years, he had collected nearly all their albums, and the only thing tacked to the bulletin board on the back of his door is a Lebanon obituary, really already yellow and brittle, clipped from the Boston Globe. He sits cross-legged on the bed, hunched over the lyrics, when he hears a knock on the door. Come in, he holders, expecting it to be Sonia in her pyjamas, asking if she can borrow his magic 8-ball or his Rubik cube. He is surprised to see his father standing in stocking feet, a small pot-belly vision beneath his oat-colored sweater vest, his mustache turning grey. Gogol is especially surprised to see a gift in his father's hand. His father had never given him a birthday present apart from whatever his mother buy. But this year his father says, walking across the room to where Gogol is sitting, he had something special. The gift is covered in a red and green and a gold striped paper left over the Christmas the year before, taped awkwardly at the seams. It is obviously a book, thick hardcover, wrapped by his father's own hands. Gogol lifts the paper slowly, but in spite of his, the tape leaves a scab. Short story of Nikolai Gogol. The jacket says, inside the price has been snipped away on the diagonal. In order it from the bookstore just for you. His father says, his voice raised in order to hear over the music. It's difficult to find its handover those days. In British publications, a very small press, it took for months to arrive. I hope you like it. Gogol leans over towards the stereo to turn the volume down a bit. He would have preferred The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy or even another copy of The Hobbit to replace the one he lost last summer in Calcutta, left on the rooftop of his father's house in Ariport and snatched away by the crows. In spite of his father's occasional suggestions, he was never been inspired to read a word of Gogol or any Russian writers for that matter. He had never been told why he was really named Gogol, doesn't know about the accident that had nearly killed his father. He thinks his father's limp is consequence of an injured playing soccer in his team. He has been told only half the truth about Gogol, that his father is a fan. Thanks, Baba, Gogol says. He got to return to his lyrics. Lately he has been lazy, addressing his parents in English, though he continued to speak to him in Bengali. Occasionally he wanders through the house with his running sneakers on. At the dinner he sometimes uses frogs. His father is still standing there in the room, watching expectantly, his hand claps together behind his back. So Gogol flips through the books. A single picture on the front, on smoother paper that the rest of the pages, shows a pencil drawing of the author, sporting a velvet jacket, a billowy white shirt and a cravat. The face is fox-like with small, dark eyes, a thin, neat moustache, an extremely large pointed nose, dark hair, slanty, steepy across his forehead, and it plastered to either side of his head. And there is a disturbing, vaguely supercilious smile set into the long, narrow lips. Gogol Ganguly is revealed to see no resemblance. True, his nose is long, but no so long. His hair dark, but surely not so dark. His skin pale, but certainly not so pale. The style of his own hair is altogether different, thick beetle like the bangs that conceal his brows. Gogol Ganguly wears a Harvard sweatshirt and a grey Levi's coatyards. He has worn a tie once in his life to attend a friend's bar mitzvah. No, he concluded confidently, there is no resemblance at all. For by now he comes to hate the questioning pertaining to his name, hates having constantly to explain. He hates having to tell people that it doesn't mean anything in India. He hates having to wear a manitee on his sweaters at a model United Nations Day at school. He never hates singing his name at the bottom of his drawing in the art class. He hates that his name is both absurd and abstract, that it has nothing to do with who he is, that it is neither Indian nor American, but of all the things Russians. He hates having to live with it, with a pet name turning good name, day after the day, second after the second. He hates seeing it on the brown paper sleeve of an National Geographical Channel subscription his parent got him for his birthdays the year before and perpetually listed in the honor roll printed in the town's newspaper. At times, his name, an enmity shapeless and weightless, manages nevertheless to distress us physically like the scratchy tag of the shirt he has been forced permanently to wear. At the time, he wishes he could disguise it, shorten it somehow the way the other Indian boys in the school, Jaya Dev, have gotten the people to call him Jay. But Gogol, already short and catchy, resists mutation. Other boys his age have begun to court girls already asking him to go to the movies or the pizza parlors, but he cannot imagine saying hi to Gogol. Under potentially romantic circumstances, he cannot imagine this is at all. From the little he knows about the Russian writers, is dismay him that his parents chose the weirdest namesake, Leo or Anton, he could have lived with. Alexander shorted to Alex, he could have greatly preferred. But Gogol sounds glorious to his ear, lacking dignity or gravity. What dismay him most is irrelevance of it all. Gogol has been tempted to his father no more than one occasion. Was his father's favorite author not this? Then again, it's his own fault. He could have never known at the school, at least as Nickel, that one day, the first day of the kindergarten, which he is no longer remembrance, could have changed everything. He could have been Gogol only 50% of the time. Like his parents, when they went to the Calcutta, he could have an alternative identity, a B-side to the shelf. We tried, his parents explained to the friends and relatives who asked why their sons lack of a good name. But he would only respond to Gogol. The school insisted his parents would add. We live in a country where a president is called Jimmy. Really, there is nothing we could do. Thank God, Gogol tells his father now. He shuts the covers and swings his legs over the edge of the bed to put the book away on his shelves. But his fathers take the opportunity to sit beside him on the bed. For a moment, he rests a hand over Gogol's shoulders. The boy's body in recent months has grown tall, nearly as tall as Ashok. The childhood puggishness has vanished from his face. The voice has begun to deepen, is slightly husky now. It occurs to Ashok that he and his son probably wear the same size shoe. In the glow of the beside lamps, Ashok noticed a scattered down emerging on his son's upper lip. An Adam's apple is prominent on his neck. The pale hand, like Ashima's, are long and thin. Ashoka wondered how closely Gogol resembled himself at this age, but there are no photographs to document Ashoka's childhood. Not until his passport, not until his life in America, does a visual documentation exist. On the night table, Ashoka seems an can of an deodorant and a tube of an clariset. On the night table, Ashoka sees a can of an deodorant, a tube of an clear seal. He lifts the book from where it lies on the bed between them, running a hand protectively over the cover. I took the library of reading it first. It has been many years since I have read these stories. I hope you don't mind. No problem, Gogol says. I feel as a special kinship with the Gogol, Ashok says. more than with any other writers. Do you know why? You like his stories. Apart from that, he spends most of his adult life outside his homelands like me. Gogol nods. Right. And there is another reason. The music ends and there is silence. But then Gogol flips the record, turning the volume up on Revolution 1. What is that? Gogol says, a bit impatiently. Ashok looks at the room. He noticed the linen obituary pinned to the bulletin boards, and then a cassette of an classical Indian music he had bought for Gogol months ago. After a concert at a crease, still sealed in its wrappers, he sees the pile of an birthday card scattered on the carpet and resembles an remembered hot August day 14 years ago in Cambridge when he held his son for the first time. Ever since that day, the day he has become a father, a memory of his accident he registered, diminishing over the years, though he will never forget that night. It is no longer lurks presently in his mind, stalking him in the same way. It does no longer loom over his life, darkening it without warning as it is used to do. Instead, it is a fact firmly to do a distance time to a place far from an Pimpton road. Today, his son's birthday is a day to honor the life. No brushes with death, and no, as of for now, Ashok decides to keep the explanation of his son's name to himself. No other reason. Good night, he says to Gogol, getting up from the bed. At the door, he pauses, turns around. Do you know the Dostoevsky once said? Gogol shook his head. Well, all came out of Gogol's overcoat. What about supposed to mean? I will make sense to you one day. Many happy returns of the day. Gogol sat up and shut the door behind his father, who has annoying the habit of always leaving it partially open. He fastened the look on the knob for a good measure, then wedged the book on a high shelf between the two volumes of an Hardy Boys. He settled down again with his lyrics on the bed. When something occurs him, his writer, he is a name after the Gogol isn't his first name. His first name is Nikoli. Not only does Gogol Ganguly have a pet name, turn a good name, but at a last name turn the first name. And so it occurs to him that no one he knows in the world, in Russia or India or America or anywhere, share his name, not even the source of his namesake. The following year, Ashoka is up for an sabbatical, and Gogol and Sonia are informed that they will be going to Calcutta for 8 months. When his parents tell him one evening after the dinner, Gogol thinks they are joking, but then they all tell him that the tickets have already been booked, the planes already made. Think of it all as a long vacation. Ashok and Ashima says to their crestfallen children, but Gogol knows that the 8-month is no vacation. He dreads that the thought of an 8-month without a room of his own, without his record and his stereo, without a friends. In Gogol's option, 8 months in Calcutta is partially like moving there, a possibility that until now has never ever remotely crossed his mind. Besides, he is sophomore now. What about the school? He points out. His parents reminded him that in the past his teachers had never minded Gogol missing the school now and again. They have given him the math and the language workbook that he is ignored, and when he turns a month or two later, they praise him for keeping up with the things. But Gogol guidance counselor expressed the concern when Gogol informed him that will be missing the entire session, half of the 10th grade. A meeting is called with Ashima and Ashoke to discuss the opinion. The guidance counselor asked him that if it is possible to enroll Gogol in an international school, but the nearest one is in Delhi. over 800 miles from the Calcutta. The guide and counselor suggested that perhaps Gogol could join his parents later after the school year's end, stayed with an relative until June. We have no relatives in this country, Ashima informed that the guide and counselor. That is why we are going to India in the first place. And so after barely 4 months of a 10th grade, after an yearly supper of a rice and a boiled potatoes and the egg, that his month insists that eat even though they will be served another supper on the plane. He is off, geometrically and US history books packed into his suitcase, which is locked along with the others with the padlock and the bound with the ropes, labeled with the address of his father's house in Alipur. Gogol always finds the label unsettling. The sight of them making him feel that his family doesn't really like to live on Penitbotran Road. They depart the Christmas day, driving with their massive collections of the luggage to Logan when they should be home opening gift. Still expecting when she enters the living room in the morning to see a tree trimmed with the lights. But the only things in the living room is descripts, price tags from all the gifts they have packed for their relatives, plastic hangers, cardboards from the shirts. They shiver as they leave the house. Without a coat or a gloves, they won't need them where they are going. And it will be by the August by the time they return. The house has been rented to some American student his father has found through the university, an unmarried couple named Barbara and Steve. In the airport, Gogol stands in the check line with his father, who is dressed up in the jacket and the tie, clothes he still thinks to wear when riding on the place. 4 in the family. His father says that when it is their turn, producing two US passports and 2 Indian ones. 2 Hindu meals, please. On the plane, Gogol is seated several rows behind his parents and Sonia in other session altogether. His parents are disturbed by this, but Gogol is secretly pleaded to be on his own. When the stewardess approaches with her cart of beverage, he tries his luck and asks for an Bloody Mary, tasting the metallic bite of an alcohol for the first time in his life. They fly first to London and then to the Calcutta via Dubai. When they fly over the Alps, his father gets out of his seat to take a picture of his snow-capped peaks through the window. On the past trips, it is used to thrill Gogol that they were flying over so many countries again and again. He could trace its eternity on the maps in the seat pocket below his trace and feel somehow adventurous. But this time it frustrates him that it is to Calcutta that they always go. Apart from visiting the relatives, there was nothing to do in Calcutta. He's already been to the planetarium and the zoo gardens and the Victoria Memorial a dozen times. They have never been to Disneyland or to the Grand Canyon. Only once, when there is a connection flight in London, was delayed. Did they leave a Heathrow and take a double-decker bus tour of the city? Thank you.